Welcome to the Survivor to Thriver show with your happiness expert, Samia Bano. Do you feel stuck, silent, and stressed? Is something hurting your heart and soul? Are you burning yourself out? If so, you are in the right place because this is the podcast people from all over the world join in to learn exactly how to stop suffering and start living with inner peace and joy. Let's get started. Hey, last episode we were talking about evaluation versus judgment, and the idea that if you want to stop suffering and start living with more inner peace and joy, then you really need to make a commitment to stop your habits of judgment and replace them with habits of evaluating situations and people. And to do so with empathy and compassion and with the intent of expanding your sense of empathy and compassion, so that when you come to your conclusions, they're not only more well informed, but that they are in more alignment with an empathetic, compassionate perspective, and therefore that make it more likely and more natural and more easy for you to act with loving kindness and respond with loving kindness and with empathy and compassion, particularly and especially in the context of when someone is suffering and struggling. And the fact of the matter is that if you're really serious about committing to your inner peace and joy, achieving a life free of suffering, a life of thriving, a life of inner peace and joy, then this is not an option. This is an absolute must. This is something that you just have to do. So I'm going to assume, because you are a listener of this podcast, that you are in fact really serious about this goal of stop suffering and start living with more inner peace and joy in your life. And so you are willing to pursue this goal and this way of being, even in the face of any struggles or challenges that may come up. Because we are talking here about doing things in ways that are very different from what you may have been used to. We're talking about creating serious change in the way you think and the way you behave. And change is never easy. And especially when we're talking about this kind of change, in this particular context, there are certain risks that you have to be willing to take on and continue ahead despite their coming up for you. What am I talking about? So, for example, one of the risks of your committing to practicing evaluation and taking on a more empathetic, compassionate point of view is that you may not like what you find when you engage in the evaluation. You may not like what you discover about your old attitudes, your old perspectives, your old ways of being. For example, as you step into a different perspective to develop a more empathetic attitude, and empathy and compassion are like two sides of a coin. So when you increase your level of empathy and understanding of a different perspective, and when it involves a different person, especially in the situation, then it's sort of almost for sure going to increase your level of compassion relative to that other person, relative to that other perspective and point of view. For example, a few days ago, I was watching a news report which was talking about a Nazi soldier who had been involved in the concentration camps, disciplining people within the concentration camps. And at this point, he is 92 years old, and we can imagine close to the end of his life. And in the interview that he recently gave, he said, now I realize that what I did was wrong, and I feel really bad about it. I feel really guilty about it, and he actually talked about this in an interview about 10 years ago, when there was a documentary being made. And as a result of that documentary being made, and his making this confession that he had actually been involved in the concentration camps and soldier and all that kind of stuff, he actually got charged. And now there's a court case going on against him. And, here he is, not in the best of health towards the end of his life, and having to deal with all of this. And it kind of resulted from his confession, his confession of how he was feeling and the guilt he was feeling, because now, he's seeing things from a different perspective, a perspective of greater empathy and compassion for the victims, and the survivors of those concentration camps, and what they went through and what they had to endure during that time. So there's a risk that when you take on a more empathetic, compassionate perspective, you may not like what you find. And now, if you don't like what you find, now what are you going to do? What are your choices? What are your options for moving forward? Well, on the one hand, you can try to ignore this new knowledge, this new information, this new awareness that you have, and move on with your life as if nothing had changed. But the fact of the matter is that you cannot unlearn what you have learned, and you cannot become unaware of what you've become aware of. And if you try to ignore it, wow, I mean, if you have a conscience, if your conscience is still alive, your conscience will not be able to maintain peace with you. And you're going to find yourself struggling and suffering because you are not living in alignment with the truths that you know and what you know to be right. So then you have to be willing to change in some very potentially drastic ways. Your way of thinking and your way of living. And when you begin to create these changes, you may face a lot of opposition. So, for example, in a case like this, where here he is, this Nazi soldier, and now he's realized his mistake, the error of his ways, and he's trying to change, but what happens? There are people who are like, oh, you criminal, and they slap a court case on him, and now he's having to struggle through that, deal with those consequences. There are a lot of people out there probably blaming and judging him now for what he did. And he'll have to deal with all of that. There may be a lot of people who, are in his circle of friends and people that perhaps he worked alongside with, who have not as yet recognized the error of their ways, that may be thinking that, he's a traitor, that, he's going crazy, or that he's going to get them all in trouble. And so now they're concerned about themselves, and so they may turn their fear and their concern and anger on him. So, you can find yourself having to face a lot of difficulties in the way of your attempting to live in alignment with the truth as you know it, as you understand it. And there may be a lot of hurdles and obstacles that come in the way. But if you are truly committed to achieving your inner peace and joy, to eliminating unnecessary suffering from your life, then you cannot afford to waver from this path of accepting the truth of your situation, of your reality, of your life as it is. When you examine it from a more empathetic, compassionate perspective, and when you evaluate instead of judge. Because if you, like we said, if you try to ignore this new knowing, if you try to, act as if this new understanding, this new awareness doesn't matter, you just really can't do it. It's not going to be sustainable. It might work for you for a little while, but in the long term, it's not a good strategy. It's not a sustainable strategy. So think about that. Okay, and I'm going to actually wrap up over here for today. And basically the reason why I shared this with you, by the way, just so you understand, is not to scare you off or to discourage you from moving ahead on the spot, but rather, it's like, if you can understand the kind of struggles and challenges that can come in your way as you move on this path, then you can prepare for them. And the better you can understand these challenges and hurdles, and the better you can prepare for them, the more likely it is that you will be able to find effective solutions to help you keep moving forward and to overcome these hurdles and challenges to the point of success, and then you can, wow, the fruit of this effort of putting in this struggle, going through this struggle, the fruit that it will bear for you will be very, very sweet, because it's a life that is free of suffering and a life of inner peace and joy, right? Because you will be in alignment with your knowing, your understanding of the truth. You will be in alignment with the knowing and the voice and the call of your conscience. And that is ultimately what will help you to be at peace, to remain calm and centered, even in the midst of the chaos that might ensue when you embark on this path. So just think about that, and I will end with just a really quick reminder that, hey, if you find yourself struggling with this in your life, or you have any fears coming up with the thought, the idea of the struggles that you might need to face as you embark on this journey, on this path to living with more compassion and empathy and giving up your attitudes of judgment and blame, then please don't struggle with those thoughts, with those fears on your own. There are lots of things that we can do to help ourselves and make things easier for ourselves as we are moving ahead on these kinds of important life journeys that are, for sure, they're challenging life journeys, but they're important, and important enough that we need to stay committed to them. And so why suffer unnecessarily? Why suffer unnecessary hardships? Why deal with unnecessary hardships? So there are lots of things we can do to ease our way along these paths. Even if things don't become easy, they can become easier. And one of the most important things that you can do to make things easier for yourself is to get some help and support. Reach out for help and support. Plug yourself into structures and systems of support and accountability. And one way you can do that is by connecting with me and allowing me to support you, and allowing me to create and hold that space of and that structure of support and accountability for you. And you know how to reach me. Just go to my website at www.academyofthriving.com. Click on the Contact Us page, and you will see the different options for how you can connect with me from there, including email, social media, and even phone. All right. So until we connect next time, I wish you lots of peace and joy.